America's pledged at least $175 billion to Ukraine since Russia invaded. That's more than the cost of the first 4 years of keeping American troops in Afghanistan. That includes military aid in the form of shells, tanks, rockets, cannons, anti-tank launchers, drones, and most recently, air support and missile defense systems worth $1 billion each. So, which weapons have proven most critical on the battlefield? And will the latest round of aid really help Ukraine in a war some have called a stalemate? Early in the war, infantry arms were easy to ship in anticipation of widespread urban warfare. The shoulder-mounted Javelin uses automated guidance to shatter tank armor with a top-down impact. Since the war started, the US has sent at least 10,000 of them to Ukraine. Just one Javelin system can cost over $200,000.
I'm Sam Feldman. I'm a defense editor with Business Insider, and I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. An anti-tank guided missile is designed to penetrate tank armor. A soldier who is trained on one doesn't take a lot of training to fire one of these. The soldier who's carrying one has to leave cover for, maybe 2 or 3 seconds for the missile to acquire a enemy armor, and then can fire it and can go back to hiding. And the missile's guidance system will take care of the rest.
Tady máme protitankovou výzbroj Javelin z Británie jako výpomoc.
The NLAW became another popular option at $40,000 each, but it can only be used once. In addition to infantry arms, the US has sent at least 100,000 sets of body armor and helmets. Combat gear like this runs for about $1,000 on the open market. The US has also sent more serious chemical, biological, and nuclear protective gear, along with bomb disposal equipment. During the first months of the conflict, manufacturers around the world struggled to keep up with Ukrainian demand. Ukrainian soldiers also received night vision devices, thermal imagery systems, and rangefinders. By the spring of 2022, Russian forces faced fierce resistance in key cities and pulled back east to resupply. That gave Ukraine some breathing room, but it's also when the reality of an extended conflict set in. Both armies turned to longer-range weapons that have remained in heavy use today. Artillery. Before the war, most Ukrainian artillery guns were Soviet-made. Ukraine tried to produce cannons domestically, but it can take more than 6 months to make just one. So American factories stepped in. This facility in Watervliet, New York, is one of the only places in the US capable of making large caliber cannons like the M777. It's supplied the military since the War of 1812. Every barrel starts as a preformed hollow cylinder of steel. The gas-powered induction furnace heats these preforms to 2,000 degrees.
All the materials that we use right now are resourced within the United States.
This machine, called a rotary forge, starts to shape the outer dimensions of the cannon tube. Then barrels go through a series of treatments that toughen them to handle firing thousands of rounds. A compressor applies thousands of pounds of pressure, bending barrels like pool noodles to remove any imperfections.
We have one of our skilled machinists going through and pressing that tube back into shape.
Workers use a bench grinder to round any sharp edges off the barrel. This part has to be done by hand.
We call it the Rolls-Royce treatment. It really puts that final finishing touch, that craftsmanship to that barrel.
As part of the inspection process, a technician uses a bore scope to look straight down the barrel. Now, it's ready for paint.
Most military equipment has what they call CARC paint. It's an acronym that stands for Chemical Agent Resistant Coating. So it's specialized to withstand all different types of conditions and potential for chemical attacks or biological attacks.
In another part of the factory, workers test every firing mechanism.
This is when the crew would insert an actual round. This is a simulated round, obviously. Seat it into the bore and then close the block, which would be ready for firing at this point. So they would fire the weapon, then they would go and open the block, and then remove the cartridge.
Each barrel is engraved with key information.
The details of the tube, where it was manufactured, the year, and the serial number. Every can of tube produced here at Waterville always has the commander's initials stamped on the can of tube, so you know when that can of tube was produced during that commander's tenure. That tradition goes back all the way since the first time we produced can of tubes early in World War I, 1917. The best part, AGF.
And this factory in Pennsylvania is making Ukraine's most important ammo, the 155mm shells used in artillery guns. The U.S. Army is producing about 35,000 rounds of them every month, more than double what it was making before the war.
Armata!
155s are the perfect balance between power and weight. They're shot from howitzers, which are basically a cannon and mortar combined. These massive guns fire shells high up into the air so that they drop down onto their targets. 155mm shells are small enough to fire up to 20 miles, but can still do serious damage. They're packed with 24 pounds of TNT and explode on impact, sending deadly shrapnel in all directions. Everything starts in the billet yard. Workers move steel rods to the next phase, the forge shop. 4 robotic saws slice the rods into 14-inch long chunks called billets.
Efficiency is key to speed.
Then they heat them for an hour at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This softens them up so they're easy to shape.
You couldn't possibly forge a billet at room temperature. We're basically turning the steel into Play-Doh.
Then machines stretch and shape the billets into their final form. Another one adds a nose, which makes it aerodynamic.
Comes into the press, it's still a tube. As it leaves the press, it's now a projectile.
They're inspected and then fed to the production shop. Then the grand finale. Workers reheat the billets, then cool them in a 6,000-gallon oil bath. After some final lathing and polishing, workers hang the shells on hooks. Then they get a fresh paint job. The entire process takes about 3 days. After the shells are done, they take a truck ride to another factory that adds TNT. Then they're ready for the battlefield. It's there that soldiers will add the fuse and turn it into a lethal bomb. Even with a brand new 155mm factory built in just 10 months in Texas, Russia continues to produce 3 times more artillery shells than the United States. And despite high demand, towed howitzers have major drawbacks. In Ukraine, they take a long time to move after they're fired, putting crews at risk. But when it comes to ground warfare, tanks remain the apex predators. For the first year of the conflict, Western officials hesitated to supply tanks to Ukraine, saying it would take too long to train soldiers how to use them. U.S. Army tankers must complete 22 weeks of training before deploying with an M1 Abrams.
These things can happen to you. You can get crushed, your arms, legs, and whatever it is. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in a tank.
Nicknamed the Beast, Dracula, and Whispering Death, the M1 Abrams packs a 120mm cannon and mounted machine guns. It's considered one of the best tanks ever made.
People who like big guns and loud noises, 1,500 horsepower engines, and fire, I mean, that's how it draw me in.
With a cost of up to $9 million each, it debuted in combat during the Gulf War and remains the U.S. Army's main battle tank. A 4-person crew operates the M1: the tank commander, the gunner, the loader, and the driver, usually the smallest member of the team.
These little dudes, they just fall right in there, huh? Those big boys gotta like crawl in there.
As part of the training, soldiers also learn how to maintain and repair the tanks. The M1's 120mm smoothbore gun fires a variety of rounds that can destroy other tanks up to 3,000 meters away.
So this is our M865 training Sabo round. This is what we use to simulate our service Sabo ammunition for training. Weighs approximately 35 pounds. The tank can hold 42 rounds total. Our service ammunition is designed to penetrate through enemy armor, and then it has a devastating effect on the inside of the vehicle.
Back in Ukraine with a limited supply of tanks, soldiers resorted to trickery to bait Russia to fire on decoys. But by early 2023, following mounting international pressure and weeks of negotiations, the tanks rolled in.
Ukraine doesn't have extensive tank production needed by this war, and so Ukraine is very dependent on its Western partners for the supports to repair tanks and for new tanks. The U.S. has given 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. If you factor in the ammunition and part support for the M1 Abrams, it's likely north of $200 million in support that the U.S. has provided in the M1 Abrams tanks.
Including German Leopard 2s and British Challengers. That's a tank ground force worth well over $1 billion. So, how does it compare to Russia's fleet?
Russia is one of the largest tank forces in the world, and Russia is using pretty much everything it's got. Ukraine has received donated tanks from Western partners. Those are all very modern tanks. The M1 Abrams is a premier tank designed to destroy Soviet and Russian-made tanks, and my guess would be the Ukrainians wish they had more. They could certainly use them. It has computerized fire control software. It has depleted uranium rounds that are designed to shatter enemy armor, and it was built specifically for tank-on-tank battles. The M1 Abrams has a high top speed. It has a gas turbine engine that creates a lot of power. It is a top tank, and yet it is also facing the same threats that have bogged down Russian and other Western-made tanks. The challenges with the M1 Abrams is that it requires a lot of maintenance. Russian tanks are less survivable than Western-made tanks. Western-made tanks are better designed to protect the crew, and when they sustain a direct hit, it's more frequent that a Western tank will be able to be towed and then repaired. You would not find me in any Russian tank. The risks of all Soviet-designed vehicles to the crew are really high. The Soviet-made tanks often become total losses and crew killers when they're hit. A good example that's indicative of this is the jack-in-the-box effect. The T-72 has a design flaw where the crew essentially sits on top of ammunition storage for the tank's shells. And that means that a blast into this space is going to potentially cook off the stored ammunition inside the tank. The top turret will basically blow off from this massive explosion of all the tank's ammunition. That'll make the tank a total loss. Both sides are adapting their armored vehicles for the pretty pervasive threat of drones. And so one way this is manifesting itself are these cope cages. It's like a welded netting that goes around the tank. This is designed to make it more tricky to land an exploding drone right on the tank's shell and blast inwards. These cages, if you will, kind of look like mosquito nets that try to keep the explosion a little bit further from the tank's hull. The other side of that is that drone pilots are becoming more skilled at getting around these and attacking vulnerable points.
And the drones themselves are getting smaller and cheaper. But they're actually more dangerous than ever. In March 2024, the U.S. Army asked for an additional $500 million for counter-drone technology. One U.S. company has sent thousands of drones to Ukraine since 2022, including its most successful product.
3, 2, 1.
These are what's known as loitering munitions. They can fly around waiting for a target to be identified before crashing to the ground to destroy it.
So it's really a combination of an artillery and a drone that has got the capabilities of both.
John Aldana manages the loitering munitions program at AeroVironment on the west coast of the United States. The company has been producing missiles like this, the Switchblade 300 and the larger 600, for over 2 decades.
They actually fold up, like so, and are inside a launch tube that's just a little bit larger than this. It launches the Switchblade out, the wings open up like that, which is why we call it a Switchblade. The propellers here, because of the air, will start to spin, and the battery, which is inside, kicks in, and it's off.
The 300 can loiter for about 15 minutes and is designed to take out small targets, like enemy soldiers and trucks, while the larger 600 can wait around for up to 40 minutes and attack armored vehicles. Operators can control the Switchblades from as far as 40 kilometers away.
You have the ability to wave off, so you can cancel the mission all the way to the very end, go back to loitering, find another target of interest, and engage a different target of interest that you may not have even known about.
The United States sent 700 of these to Ukraine in early 2022. Videos shared by Ukrainian forces claimed to be Switchblade attacks on the ground. Each Switchblade 300 is reported to cost around $6,000. That's more than an off-the-shelf drone rigged to carry a grenade, but far less than the cost of an unmanned aircraft, like the MQ-9 Reaper, that can fly back to base once it's fired on a target. And the Switchblades are being designed to think more and more for themselves.
Autonomous or semi-autonomous drones are going to be used to conduct these kinds of conflicts.
That means tracking and recognizing a target, even one that's on the move. When Russia invaded Ukraine, many experts predicted an easy victory for Putin's forces. But Russia miscalculated the level of Ukrainian resistance.
Drones have given Ukrainian forces the ability to field cheap and persistent air power that brings pretty significant threats to Russian ground forces.
And for a while, its ill-prepared troops were caught in a 40-mile-long convoy to the north of Kiev. They were sitting ducks for Ukrainian guns and drones. The Ukrainian government launched an appeal to fund an army of drones.
We call on the service of Ukraine all the simplest drones, which you use to shoot nature.
And teams of civilian engineers have adapted large numbers of off-the-shelf drones for the battlefield. Some, like this one, can grip and release small grenades. Social media transformed the drone into a symbol of heroic Ukrainian resistance. Aerial footage of strikes on Russian targets are often accompanied by rock music. The impression is of a nimble David slaying the Russian Goliath. But the reality is more nuanced. Unmanned aircraft, drones, and loitering munitions certainly helped. But Russia quickly stepped up its defenses and used drones of its own.
They weren't ready for it, but they are now,